Moving on from looking at the research design, we can look at primary data research. So primary data research is any data that you carry out yourself. So it's first-hand research. You could do this from lab experiments to observations. It's just data that you carried out yourself without the grabbing it from other sources. The first advantage of this obviously is because you're carrying it out. You get to look at you get the data exactly for what you want. Also, it's current, so this means that some of the stuff you might get from other sources could be outdated due to the fact that it could have been done obviously a long time ago. And also another advantage is the fact that you know your research can be trusted. You don't know what sort of effective factor the other research might have had on it. The disadvantages, however, are of course, as it's your research, it could be at risk of you being biased towards it. If you're doing lab experiments, not natural observations, it could become expensive. And of course, it takes up long periods of your time. Then moving on to secondary data research. This research is collected by other people. So obviously you'll be getting research from books, potentially online, magazines, other stuff like that, rather than obviously you having a first-hand input into it. The advantages of this type of research is that it's easy, obviously, to get something off the internet. It's quick and cheap, because obviously you may have to pay for some of the books and some of the other sources, but mainly you're just getting it offline. It's quicker, quick search into the internet. You might find the sort of data that you're looking for. It could be, obviously the disadvantages could be that it could be poor quality. You don't know how well that test's been carried out, how qualified the person is, how well and thorough they've done it. And of course this could lead to poor quality. Also, you might not find any data that's specific to what you're wanting to use for your investigation. And then finally, going back to of course the results might be outdated. Moving on to the classification of data. This is obviously looking at what different types of forms data can take on. And obviously this is highlighted by the fact that when you're looking at what sort of data you want to collect, this obviously you will need different types of statistical tests. Will give you different type of data. So starting with the first type of classification of data is discrete. This is basically would be data where you're looking for a simple yes/no answer. It's separated values, opposites. You're giving normally you're only giving the subject two different categories to go with. So the scenario of this would be, do you enjoy training, yes or no? The next type of data is ordinal data. This, obviously, as you can see from the example, would take a table sort of form. It would look at the different numbers between the different score categories. And data is put into a ranked order to see, obviously, whoever scores highest. And then linking this to the scenario, obviously, if the results and tables were scores were placed into a table to decide who goes to the Olympics, like a qualifying for the Olympics. And then the gymnasts are obviously ranked on their scores, rated, and this is where you would use ordinal data to decide who's obviously ranked highest. Moving on to nominal data. Nominal data obviously links to the name, and is data that is mutually exclusive. Means that basically it has to be one thing. It can't be, so say for example heads or tails, it could only be one. It couldn't be both. So this is included in normal data by the fact that say you ask them a question and then you would have different categories, and you would then tally the answer they give for different categories. So any numbers that are involved in the tallying obviously don't have an actual mathematical meaning. And it is incredibly uninformative, as it is literally just a tally. It doesn't give you any sort of qualitative reasons for why they've given that. So scenario wise, a tally of the answers given by gymnastics from the following question. So what event do you participate in? So you would have obviously your different categories, ask them, and then take a tally on each category. Next is continuous data. So there are two types of continuous data, ratio and interval. Starting with interval, obviously unlike the nominal data, the numbers in the scale don't have, they have a meaning. So obviously there'll be equal intervals and no meaningful zero. So this basically means that the score can go below zero. So obviously for obviously an example, it would be change in weight or temperature. So you could go to -30 in temperature, or in the changes in weight, you could obviously go from you could have a -3 kilogram loss over a period of time. So basically, it's just about the fact that you can go below zero. There's no meaningful zero there, and the equal intervals just basically you going down in equal amounts. And then finally, ratio. So ratio does have a meaningful zero, so obviously you can't go below zero, and this would be not looking at changes in weight. It'd just be weight, height, heart rate. So these all have a meaningful zero. You obviously can't go below zero in any of them, and that's the difference between ratio and interval. Basically, meaningful zero, non-meaningful zero. Now moving on to quantitative data research methods. Qualitative data research methods. Qualitative data research methods looks at more opinions and emotions rather than numbers and the like that you would get with quantitative data. As said there, it comes in a written form. It can take several forms. We'll look at the different forms in a minute, but obviously you have interviews that come in 4 different forms: structured, unstructured, semi-structured, and focus group. But you also, to go along with questionnaires and also observations, which come in lots of different forms, but these will be explained later. So a scenario for qualitative data could be a gymnast's opinions on stress before, during, and after, and how this performance and how this would affect their performance, obviously this is qualitative because it's not, you would have to carry out interviews to see, because you can't measure the emotions and how much stress someone's feeling. You would have to ask them questions about this rather than trying to get any sort of numerical data from it. So firstly, looking at interviews, and we'll start with unstructured. Obviously there's only a set of starting questions before you move into conversations with no set questions. So just giving them that prompt, that first question, and then the interview can kind of go wherever it wants, sort of thing. Although the interviewer does have to be fairly skilled in order to ensure that information collected is helpful and can be used. Obviously, if you just go into conversation that's completely off topic from the starting question, you aren't going to get anywhere, and you won't be able to get any meaningful data from that. Looking at the advantages and advantages are that it allows for considerably more data collection, as the researcher can ask further questions and obviously go into greater detail about this rather than just asking the question, getting an answer. They can elaborate on that. The subject is also likely to go into more detail than with set questions, as obviously they have that flexibility to sort of go anywhere they want. However, there are disadvantages to this. Although you might get more helpful data, more in-depth data, the researcher could find it hard to get the correct information, as obviously it's harder to analyse, harder to sift through, and you have to be skilled in order to ensure you can abstract that detailed data. And the flexibility of the interview obviously leads it to have a longer duration. Moving on to semi-structured, and this is an in between structured and unstructured. The interviewer has a guide, and obviously there are set questions and there are a guide, but you can slightly move away from the questions that are set, and this just allows the interviewer, if he thinks there's anything that he needs to elaborate on, it just gives him that freedom to elaborate on it, to try and gain that little bit more information out of the answer rather than just sticking with the set questions. And the advantages to this would be that it obviously allows for a bit more flexibility for any follow-up questions to ensure that added information. However, the set questions do ensure that a little bit more correct data is collected than structured. Disadvantages would be obviously it is more time consuming. You're less likely to get not helpful data because it only will be when necessary that the interviewer will ask in a semi-structured interview for more data. So it's not like the unstructured where it could go anywhere. Moving on to structured interviews, obviously this is just interviews with a set guide. There's very, very limited movement away from the set questions. But there are advantages to this, and the advantages include that the set of structures will provide a framework that collects quality data and only allows for relevant questions to be asked. So obviously you're not going to be affected by any off-topic conversations or any useless data. The data also needs obviously less analysing, and as obviously you're just getting the clear answers, there's not a lot to sift through, which means that you can then have a less qualified interviewer leading this. The disadvantages, however, are that the structure of the interview might mean that it lacks, the data collected lacks detail, because the participant must stick to the questions, because there are no follow-up questions. And the reliability of the answers can also be questioned, as there's not really a chance for the real opinions of the individuals to be seen and considered. And then moving on to a focus group, this is basically an interview that's sort of more unstructured, and it is obviously conducted with a group, and there's a big emphasis on group reaction. The advantages to this would be a focus group can be a more effective way of gaining information, as the more natural environment allows for them to give their real opinion. This, of course, will have some disadvantages, but it also allows the observer to examine the group dynamics and how this could potentially affect the responses given. So, leading on from that, this then becomes a disadvantage because the interviewer might then see more dominant people. Their opinions become more to the forefront than people that may have a different opinion but may not be willing to speak up and then take on that more dominant person. Also, these are very difficult to analyse. Obviously, you have lots of going on. You would probably have to record this or make quick notes because there is just so much going on that you'll struggle to gain proper information from it without being a quality interviewer that can then look at and sift through this